For 3 years, Daniel Carter had walked through the same corporate building every morning wearing the same gray uniform and pushing the same old mail cart. To everyone at Sterling Global, he was simply the mailroom guy, a quiet single father who delivered envelopes, sorted packages, and stayed invisible. What nobody knew was that Daniel had once been a highly successful businessman who had stepped away from his former career after becoming a single father to his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. He wanted a stable life for her, so he accepted the mailroom position and quietly rebuilt his life from the ground up. Every morning he dropped Lily at school before arriving at work, and every evening he hurried home to cook dinner, help with homework, and listen to her stories about school. Daniel never complained about his position, but the employees around him often treated him badly. Some executives laughed when he entered their offices, while younger employees sometimes left piles of unnecessary packages on his cart just to make his job harder. One manager, Richard, was especially cruel. He regularly called Daniel the Invisible Man and once laughed in front of several employees, saying, "3 years in a mailroom? Some people are simply born to stay at the bottom." Daniel said nothing. He simply picked up the documents and continued working. His patience wasn't weakness. He had learned long ago that dignity didn't require an audience. One afternoon, Daniel delivered an important envelope to the executive conference room. The company's senior managers were discussing a major financial problem. Sterling Global had lost several important clients, and the board was preparing to replace the current CEO. Daniel accidentally heard part of the conversation as he placed the envelope on the table. The executives were blaming each other, but Daniel immediately recognized the real problem. The company's distribution strategy was outdated, and several decisions were wasting millions of dollars. Daniel had spent years studying business operations before becoming a father, and he knew exactly what was going wrong. But he was only the mailroom employee, so nobody would have listened. That evening, Daniel returned home and found Lily sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up and smiled. "Daddy, how was work?" Daniel smiled back. "Same as always." Lily frowned. "Do they still make fun of you?" Daniel paused. She had noticed more than he realized. "Sometimes," he admitted. Lily looked angry. "That's not fair. You're smarter than them." Daniel laughed softly and kissed her forehead. Being smart isn't about proving you're better than someone else. It's about knowing who you are. The next morning, Daniel received an unexpected phone call from a lawyer. The lawyer introduced himself as Mr. Brooks and explained that he represented the majority shareholder of Sterling Global. Daniel was confused. "Why are you calling me?" The lawyer replied, "Because the board has made a decision, and before anyone else learns about it, you need to know that you have been selected as the company's new CEO." Daniel thought it was a joke. Then Mr. Brooks explained everything. Years earlier, Daniel had quietly invested his savings into Sterling Global through a holding company. Over time, those shares had grown enormously. After the previous CEO's failures, Daniel's ownership stake made him the largest individual shareholder. The board had investigated his background and discovered that he had the business experience necessary to save the company. They didn't want another celebrity executive. They wanted someone who understood the company from the ground up. Daniel looked around his small kitchen. "You're telling me I'm becoming CEO?" "Yes," the lawyer said. "Effective Monday." Daniel sat silently for several seconds. He thought about the people who had mocked him, the executives who had ignored him, and the 3 years he had spent pushing that mail cart. But he also thought about Lily. He didn't want revenge. He wanted to build something better. On Monday morning, Daniel arrived at the company wearing his usual gray uniform. He pushed his mail cart through the lobby as usual. Richard saw him and laughed. "Still here, Daniel? I thought you'd eventually find a real career." Daniel smiled calmly. "Actually, Richard, I think my career is about to change." Richard laughed again. He had no idea how true those words were. A few minutes later, the executive elevator opened. Daniel stepped inside, and when the doors closed, the mailroom employee disappeared. The new CEO was about to walk into the boardroom. The entire executive floor went silent when Daniel walked through the glass doors wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. The same man they had ignored for 3 years now stood confidently. beside the board chairman. Richard was the first to recognize him. His face went completely pale.
Daniel?
He whispered. Daniel looked at him calmly. Good morning, Richard. Nobody spoke. The chairman stepped forward and addressed the executives. Allow me to introduce your new chief executive officer, Daniel Carter. Shock spread across the room. Several employees who had mocked Daniel in the mailroom suddenly looked at the floor. One woman covered her mouth in disbelief. Another executive whispered, That's impossible. Daniel simply walked to the head of the conference table and sat down. Richard nervously approached him after the meeting. Sir, I didn't know. Daniel raised one hand. I know. Richard swallowed. I apologize for everything I said. Daniel looked at him for a moment. Your apology matters, but what matters more is how you treat people from now on. Richard nodded quickly. Daniel didn't fire him. Instead, he gave him a difficult assignment. Improve the company's employee treatment policies within 30 days. Daniel wanted everyone to understand that leadership wasn't about humiliating people who had less power. It was about creating an environment where everyone could do their best work. During his first week as CEO, Daniel surprised the entire company by spending several hours in the mailroom. He examined delivery records, listened to employees, and discovered dozens of inefficient procedures. Then he walked through different departments and asked employees what prevented them from doing their jobs properly. Within weeks, he changed the distribution system, renegotiated several supplier contracts, and eliminated unnecessary expenses. The company's financial situation began improving rapidly. But Daniel's biggest change wasn't financial. He created a policy guaranteeing respect for every employee regardless of position. He increased wages for lower-paid workers, improved workplace facilities, and established a program allowing employees to suggest business improvements directly to management. People began seeing the CEO differently. He wasn't a distant executive who only cared about profits. He knew what it felt like to be ignored. One afternoon, Daniel brought Lily to the office after school. She walked through the same lobby where employees had once seen her father pushing a mail cart. Daniel held her hand as they entered the elevator. Lily looked around in amazement. Daddy, this is your office now? Daniel smiled. Yes. She looked at him proudly. Does that mean nobody can make fun of you anymore? Daniel laughed. I hope they don't make fun of anyone anymore. When they reached the executive floor, Daniel introduced Lily to his assistant and showed her the large windows overlooking the city. But instead of sitting behind his enormous desk, Daniel sat on the carpet, beside her while she showed him a drawing she had made at school. Several employees passing the office stopped and smiled. The powerful CEO was still the same father who rushed home every evening to help his daughter with homework. Later that evening, Daniel called a company-wide meeting. Hundreds of employees gathered in the main auditorium. Daniel stood on the stage and looked across the crowd. For 3 years, many of you knew me as the man who delivered your mail, he said. Some of you respected me. Some ignored me. Some laughed at me. But I learned something during those 3 years. The room became silent. Your position doesn't determine your worth. Daniel paused. Anyone can become important when given a title. The real test is how you treat people when you believe they can't do anything for you. Nobody moved. Richard stood in the crowd, visibly emotional. He finally understood what Daniel had been teaching without ever saying it. After the meeting, Richard approached Daniel privately. I wish I had treated you differently. Daniel nodded. You have the opportunity to treat everyone differently from now on. Richard extended his hand. Daniel shook it. Months later, Sterling Global was thriving again. The company had regained major clients. Employee morale had improved, and Daniel's leadership had transformed the culture. Yet he never forgot the mailroom. He kept his old gray uniform in a small, framed display inside his office, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a reminder of where he had started. One evening, Lily sat beside him in his office as the city lights filled the windows. Daddy, she asked, are you happy now? Daniel smiled. I was happy when I had you. Everything else is just extra. Lily hugged him. Daniel looked at the old mail cart displayed near the office entrance and smiled. For 3 years, they had looked down on the man pushing it. They never realized that the quiet single father in the mailroom was already capable of leading the entire company.